Investors have tens of trillions of dollars of investments in private and public companies. Think about that for just a moment. Trillions. Let that number sink in. You and I both know that this enormous sum of capital holds tremendous power. The question we need to ask ourselves is this: how are we, as faithful followers of Christ, leveraging this influence? Now, we can all come up with the quaint and easy Christian responses, but I think we as believers are up against something even more sinister. It's financial apathy. The problem we face isn't necessarily having access to influential amounts of money. The problem has to do with our disassociation regarding what it means to be an investor. Too often, we allow others to determine where our money is going. It's like handing the wheel over to someone who couldn't care less about the safety of those on the streets around us or walking on the roads in front of us. We would never do that. Let me tell you my story about how I got into investing. I did an MD PhD program at Harvard Medical School. As part of the program, I received a stipend of roughly $10,000 a year. Not a lot of money, but I was single at the time and I didn't have a lot of expenses, so I was able to save a portion of that. I thought about investing into typical mutual funds, and what I found as I researched was that the top 10 holdings were not companies that I felt comfortable owning because they didn't line up with my values. Because of my faith, I could not bring myself to invest in these companies. One of the things that struck me as I was learning was that investing in mutual funds or ETFs is actually owning parts of companies. But the system obscures our ownership. We often don't know what we own. My roommate was doing his PhD in economics at Harvard, and he advised me that I should learn how to invest myself. He gave me a few books, one of which was by Peter Lynch, and I devoured the book. I thought it was absolutely fascinating and decided to use what I learned from Peter Lynch, who I still consider a mentor of mine, though I've never met him, and implement his lessons in investing. I started researching and poking around and trying to reconcile my findings in finance with what I found in Scripture. In Proverbs chapter 10, verse 2, it says, "Ill-gotten gains have no lasting value, but righteousness delivers from death." What's fascinating about this is the author of Proverbs implores the son, implores the daughter to avoid these bad profits. It's phrased in this passage as, quote, ill-gotten gains, which are profits that are made at the expense of others, profits that come from some activity that results in harm toward others. In contrast, the biblical narrative calls us to derive our profits and our livelihood from good profits, from activities that are the byproduct of serving well the needs of others. Thousands of years ago, the author of Proverbs was making a very simple but very profound statement that we need to be careful and not join into schemes that are hatched by people that are about ill-gotten gain, bad profits where there may be some kind of a common purse. If you think about it, a mutual fund is in some sense a common purse where there's one pool of capital, and the fund manager allocates out of that common purse into various companies. We, as the wise son or the wise daughter, should seek to avoid these schemes of bad profit in favor of the opportunities for good profit. That's because God has given us great responsibility with the money He has placed in our hands, and He asks us to steward it well on His behalf, to put it where it will do the most good, so that it will further His plans to redeem the world and help humanity flourish. There's a whole movement of people, investors, advisors, Christians, who are trying to discover what we own and how we might use it. There's another great verse in Proverbs chapter 11, verse 10 that says, "When the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. When the wicked perish, there are shouts of joy." The term righteous here basically refers to people who put others' interests ahead of their own. They're willing to disadvantage themselves for the sake of others. And the opposite is, of course, the wicked. Those who put their own economic, social, or personal desires ahead of others. When the righteous prosper, the city rejoices, meaning that the blessing of the righteous redounds to those around them. There's such an overflow of prosperity in all dimensions that the city rejoices. Now, it's tragic that today, when people prosper, when the rich get richer, it tends to not always lead to that overflow of blessing that makes the city rejoice. Part of our thesis in this movement of faith-driven investing is that investment equals ownership. And our aspiration is to advocate for the cities and the communities that we're in, that they can experience some of the blessing and the rejoicing that should come from biblical and wise investing. For me, it started with, what do these companies do? What's happening behind the ticker symbol? As I mentioned before, we as investors, especially as Christian investors, have trillions of dollars in our hands. This can be used in a way that harms employees, destroys the environment, and cheats our customers. But invested wisely and faithfully, it has just as much power to drive positive, lasting, and righteous change. Faith-driven investors have a sacred role. We are called by God to build ventures, to redeem and direct investment capital, to give toward efforts to expand and unlock additional capital, and to support companies and funds that reflect and affirm our values. The world has bought into the lie that investing is largely a passive activity. And even the term passive, people think about very low-cost products where there are minimal basis points charged. In fact, the whole world of investing has become more and more commoditized. More and more people think about the market as this abstract entity that is divorced from the productive capacity of the underlying companies. If you ask most people what they own, they have no idea. Investing in general has just become divorced from its original purpose, which is to supply capital to companies. Only when we return to the origin of investing does it reframe and hopefully rekindle how exciting investing can be. We as investors are deploying capital to companies. It's not just being a passive participant in a larger world where somebody else determines the rules of the game. I mean, if you're an owner of a small business down the corner, you care a lot about that business, right? Because your name is attached to it. You care about the practices that the company takes part in. If that company is going to have legal trouble, you'd be in trouble too. If that company gets accolades, well, then you get to look good as a result. Now, I get it. If it's a private business owned by a couple of people, it's quantitatively different. But really, it's not qualitatively different. Investing is ownership, and we should have a degree of pride in the companies that we own. I like to use this test. Would I be proud to tell people that my son or my daughter worked at that company? If not, then we shouldn't be investing in that company. And if it is, well, then that's great. Go for it. If you're left wondering what to do, I suggest that you conduct some simple tests. Ask yourself, do I want my name associated with that company? Do I think supporting that company's initiatives would somehow drag my name through the mud? What does it do to our integrity as Christians to support companies that harm others? It doesn't take a lot to solve the problem of financial apathy. You don't have to blow up your whole portfolio and conduct some kind of fire sale. Just start with some really basic reminders of what the purpose of investing is. How can you, as a Christ follower, invest capital into companies in a way that makes the city rejoice? This kind of thinking changes everything.